The 80s had the General. The 90s had John Gilligan. In the noughties, it was the reign of Martin Marlowe Hyland. His was a familiar path with success and power, and then the recklessness. He had to go, because with him, an innocent young man doing an honest day's work died. Crime World presents Caught in the Crossfire, the unsolved murders of coke kingpin Marlowe Hyland and innocent Anthony Campbell. Available now on all podcast platforms. Yeah, over your little shocker.
Over my little shocker, yeah. Just a little, if you could sum up my life, that'd be it.
Would it?
Yeah.
Just lurching from one
disaster
situation like that into another.
Just sort of vaguely recovering enough to stay vertical and then lurching into another disaster shortly after.
To explain to anybody listening or watching, Niall was rushing to get in here and coming from somewhere and rushing all day.
Rushing all day.
As many of us do. And managed to, in the middle of all the rush, drop his phone and arrived in here in a bit of a flap, because I know that feeling when you think you've lost your phone. It's everything on it. It's the hassle of it.
It is the hassle, yeah.
It's the hassle of it. And then it's also who's trying to contact you. And
kids and all that, let alone, reporters, let alone all the sort of vaguely dodgy stuff.
That's on it.
That's on it.
Well, that would have been my first now, to be honest with you. That is always, whenever I even mislay my phone, it's the first thing. Yeah. Jesus Christ, what's on it? But anyway.
So through years of experience, I've learned how to get your phone back. What you do is you lock it. You try and ring it.
You try and find it first, where I find my phone.
Yeah. Then you lock the phone. You try and ring it or and you send a message, please ring this. You never get an answer to that. And then you say, I will give a reward of 40 euros. And
then I start ringing your phone.
Yeah.
And now it was on silent.
It was on silent.
In fairness. And eventually a guy answers the phone.
Yeah.
And you took over the conversation and you arranged within 5 minutes to meet him.
Yeah.
You're in Talbot Street, hand him the 40 euro.
Yeah.
And you got your phone back.
And then on we go.
Till
I lose my phone the next time.
Yeah, but it's the way you carry things in your pockets, and they're always, your wallet's always falling out. You're kind of dripping all your stuff behind you.
I am. Like but
it's stress. Like you have to kind of calm it all down, because really it's very bad for you, I have to say.
It's bad for...
And rushing and kind of having a million and one things to do, and that's when you get forgetful. Stress makes you forgetful. Do you know that?
Stress does, like, of course. And
you can't hear what people are saying, and you're sort of, it's horrible.
Because it really is like, I've all my life, I've envied people who don't go around
dropping bits,
using their phones or don't forget stuff.
Do you leave your jackets and stuff behind you whenever you...
People say, where have you lost your wallet this week?
Yeah, I
do it all the time. And inability to concentrate on what I'm doing at the moment. And then I have a great memory, don't I? For other stuff.
Oh, you do, absolutely.
For like names of people, like people who say, even just before we came on, I was saying, oh, that's that guy. Like I can remember names of people being convicted of stuff.
But the thing is, like, summer is supposed to be a time to relax and all the rest of it. And I think probably for people like you and I, it gets ever more bloody stressful, because you're trying to cope with a change in the routine and trying to keep an eye from afar.
And also what people don't realise as well about journalism is people think, oh, you must have been really busy during the general election. Yeah. And of course you might be busy, but it's the absolute easiest.
Yeah.
When loads is happening, because you literally have to just write it down.
It's when it's quiet.
When it gets quiet in the summer that you have to start trying to find stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So beware, everybody.
So anyway, the people on YouTube will be saying, what has that got to do with crime?
Well, I'll tell you now, because I think, in fairness, that Deliveroo driver that got your phone, like he did seem to try and ask around when he picked it up out of the gutter that you dropped it in. Did anybody? And somebody said it was theirs, and he said that he asked them to put in the PIN and they didn't know the PIN. And he came all the way down to your door to give it to you. I think he's a good citizen, perhaps.
And, it's what's called enlightened self-interest, I suppose, where people are... They're behaving in an enlightened way, but a bit of self-interest encourages them along.
A little bit. But anyway, look, he was a good guy and he brought it back to you, and you have your phone, and it's just saved you so much stress and hassle to have it back. Now, you talk about the summer and silly season, I suppose. It just never seems to be quiet for us here.
No.
Podcast. And this is a story we've been looking to come to for a few days, and we're just trying to get around to it. And when I heard it last week, it stopped me in my tracks, I have to say. As a woman, as a mother of 2 young girls, this is your absolute worst nightmare.
It is your like
the taxi driver rapist.
Yeah, so a guy called Raymond Shorten was convicted last week of 2 separate rapes, 2 women who got into the back of his taxi, and he raped them on 2 separate occasions. He's currently awaiting sentence. He's on remand in prison. I think that the real shocking thing about it is the deliberate, calculated manner in which he went about committing these horrendous predatory acts. Some of the shocking bit of it is it the fact he looks really regular? I mean, maybe that doesn't make sense, but, you know, you can look through him on Facebook. His Facebook page is quite open, and the pictures of him that are being used are taken from that account. And he looks like a very much a sort of regular middle.
Someone's dad. And I mean, we'll come to that.
Yeah.
Because that someone has been incredibly devastated by this as well. And no doubt all his family.
Yeah.
But that's what he looks like, a family guy. The sort of fella that you might be happy that picked your daughter up drunk in a taxi.
Exactly.
Home,
exactly. You might think that
a real Dublin taxi driver.
A Dublin taxi driver likes football and a few pints, and you know, would have a sort of person you would think, like, as a man, and he's roughly my age, you know, who he obviously has young daughters, and somebody like that you would think would have the best interests at heart of a young woman who gets into the taxi.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing about it. He is the worst nightmare, really, because, you know, behind that facade of a family man, of a father of girls and boys, you know, of a regular chatty Dublin taxi driver, was a predator.
Yes.
Who looked out for victims on the street, who I found the evidence from the case of the first girl, the 19-year-old woman who was both raped and anally raped in the back of his taxi on the night of June 25th, 2022, that she talks about kind of walking along the street, and that he appears to have taken a couple of U-turns when he sees her staggering.
Yeah. I mean, and of course his own evidence of that encounter was vile.
Yeah.
I mean, it was absolutely vile. Because, you know, so basically what his modus operandi from these 2 cases are, he hangs around nightclubs, he sees a particularly drunk young woman on her own, away from her friends. Both of the rapes are similar in that way. The woman is taken in the back of his taxi. At some point, both of these women are clearly drunk, and, you know, they both have had to be questioned with that in mind, which is, you know, I think a horrible thing to have to undergo when they are so incapacitated that they don't know what's happening. He seems to pull in the taxi, and they have both spoken about effectively being woken up to being raped.
And then he drops them off. And in the case of the second girl, he dropped her home. She had either lost her phone or had no charge on it. Now, she was also a very young girl, only 20. And this second rape occurs a couple of months later in August of 2022. And she describes herself as being very drunk. She falls asleep in the back of the car and wakes up essentially to him on top of her. And then he drops her to the address that she's given him or nearby. And he says to her, "Where's the fare?"
Yeah.
And she doesn't have her phone working with any charge in it. So he tells her to go into her parents and get the money.
Yeah. I mean,
she goes into the parents and she gets the money and she goes out and pays him. I mean, what a scumbag. And I don't use that word very often. No. But I mean...
So the first rape, it's described as the woman described herself as having drank 5 pints of cider, which she wasn't normally used to, in June 2022. She described what she had, there was gaps in her memory on her way home. She recalled waking up in the front passenger seat of the taxi with a man driving. Her eyes were heavy, she fell asleep. And she said the man moved her to the back seat where he raped her anally and vaginally. And she said it was very sore and she was coming in and out of consciousness. You know, for both of the rapes, he was ultimately questioned. And, you know, I mean, it's obviously free there for anybody to say no comment. I mean, that's under our law, but of course he didn't go that way. I mean, what he went on to say was that it was consensual, that he went on to, describe them in really, I think, vile, unflattering terms. And then we also heard other evidence, because obviously once he was arrested, then his phone was taken and the police went through his phone. He seems to have, I think he had 2 phones at one stage, one of them for work. But anyway, they went through the phones and they came across 3 other women who had had sexual encounters with him. Now, those encounters were, I suppose, described as consensual. But we ultimately, the Sunday World, spoke to one of them women because those women were, I presume, subpoenaed and asked to be witnesses. And one of those women, a young woman as well, described what happened to her when she had this sexual encounter with him. She basically was in the same position, that she was very drunk, that she wasn't sure what she was doing. And ultimately, she ended up having sex with him. And that whatever occurred to her, she believed at least that it didn't reach that criminal bar. But there's no doubt in her mind that she was preyed upon, that she'd been in a nightclub, she'd become separated from her friend, she was very, very drunk. And, that's what happened to her. And she describes, maybe realising something had occurred and feeling basically violated and disgusted by it.
She's in quotes she gave to the Sunday World this weekend. She said it was in 2021.
Yeah.
I was 20 at the time. I was very, very drunk. I was literally falling as I was walking down the road and I couldn't get through to my family to call me a taxi. I was literally locked.
Yeah.
She said he began driving and he asked her if she was staying out. She said, yeah, on the spur of the moment, she recalled. Then we drove somewhere, a little dark place. I didn't really know where we were going. And he got into the back of the taxi. I think he asked me if I wanted to have sex. And I said, yeah, but I wouldn't have done it sober. I was very uncomfortable after that. And he was texting me.
Yeah. I mean, look, that doesn't, and obviously the police will have investigated that and that doesn't reach that criminal bar. I mean, there's a criminal bar where, things have to be able to be proven in court, or the DPP have to at least believe it could be proven beyond reasonable doubt. But, it's obviously, that is predatory behaviour.
Totally,
that is predatory behaviour.
Imagine it's your child.
Exactly. It's predatory behaviour. It's preying on somebody that is vulnerable and weak, whatever about whether it reaches some sort of criminal level. And obviously we live in a civilised society where there is a high bar to be placed on these things. Nonetheless, this is obviously what he was doing, and that there was 2 other women who had experiences and they came forward. We believe there are other things under investigation in relation to Raymond Shorten as well.
Like, I was actually having a conversation recently with a couple of other old women like myself about the younger girls going out in town. And, look, it's gone on for generations and decades. There's no point in claiming it's just the kind of the young people now. People go out and get pissed, they get drunk, and they're in town. And I always say to my own to make sure they stay with a group, that they get a taxi with people, all the rest of it, and that they order a taxi on an app. Whatever you do, it's like they're picking up taxis off the side of the road. That is just far more. There's not that trail, really, that electronic trail there.
Yeah.
It's much safer to have, your downloaded free now or whatever you use on your phone and to order it. But we were discussing it because somebody I knew had been in town. I think I told you this story.
Yeah.
And was coming out of a club late at night, early hours of the morning, and noticed a girl very, very drunk on her own and very young.
Yeah.
And went over to just see was she okay, because she told me that there was a kind of a group, or certainly she was just concerned about her. There was people sort of around her, guys around her and this sort of thing. And she obviously wasn't with them. And this girl was drunk, like fall over drunk. So she helped her to sit down. She got her phone. She tried to Snapchat or Instagram some of the friends that were on the phone. Nobody answered. And she eventually realised that that this girl, she realised she knew who she was. She certainly knew an older relative of this girl. So she got an address and she put her in a taxi and brought her home to a part of town she wasn't going to, went completely out of her way and out of pocket to do that. But wasn't she lucky that somebody like that came along, a responsible, only slightly older
Well, I mean,
person.
one of the scary things about this is that often when obviously we're not in that circumstance in terms of being around young people drinking all the time, but often when they get them into a taxi, you think now they're safe.
Yeah, but
that is the moment you actually think, put them in the taxi. Thank God they're safe now. They can go off. And look, you're really relying on people to be decent people.
You are, yeah.
But the funny thing about these sort of guys, I mean, this guy now is a serial rapist, a serial sex attacker, a serial predator who's operated in Dublin probably for a couple of decades. God only knows what else is in the background. But, you can go on and look at him and he looks like a normal.
Well, I mean, you certainly wouldn't feel, if you were just looking at the guy, you wouldn't feel probably, worried about getting into his taxi. I suppose those two girls that made the complaint and came forward and that he was convicted of both those rapes, and they were extremely brave. Their lives will have been changed for good. And I think his sentencing is due up next month.
Yeah.
And we're going to cover it because this is a really important story. But given those little details that we know, that he's out, he's watching in nightclubs, he's got the taxi there, he's seeing girls that are really, really drunk stumbling along a road, and he is going out of his way in order to pull up beside them in a taxi.
Yeah.
Probably, sometimes taxi drivers don't want to take girls or guys who are that drunk. They don't want them getting sick in their taxi. You know what I mean? They don't really need the hassle.
Yeah.
But he was going out of his way. He was out looking for that.
Yeah.
And how many girls did or could the likes of him have brought home in a car who did fall asleep on the way?
Yeah.
And who woke up the next morning probably in their own homes, but with only vague memories of something and maybe a niggling feeling, or maybe not even that.
No. And I remember, in the case of one of the girls who had to come forward, she was then, and I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be able to cross-examine people that make allegations of a very serious nature. However, this girl still had to come forward, and under cross-examination, she rejected the defence's contention that there was mutual kissing and then consensual sexual activity. This girl is going to be obviously conscious of the fact that she's had too much to drink, that puts her...
And there's gaps in her memory, no doubt.
That puts her on a back foot. She said her mother was surprised when her daughter arrived home that night. She said that her daughter was agitated and crying, and after the taxi left, she noticed the zip in her jeans was down, and her daughter told her a few minutes later that the driver had raped her. The woman's mother, this is in court, became visibly emotional during her testimony when she recalled asking as in him, and she said she was shocked and thought she was going to get sick. So they all had to, that's another trauma. And, of course, people have a right to a defence, but, for people to have to come forward under those circumstances, and you can understand why somebody who has been drunk and who's suffered something that they can't even fully remember it'd be such a disinhibition for them to come forward,
So there's the victims, there are their families, there's the women that were contacted that the bar perhaps of their experience wasn't high enough for this criminal offence to have occurred, or they possibly didn't make a complaint, or they, possibly in their statements have agreed that it was consensual, albeit they were drunk. There's all of that trauma going on there, and all the, that individual we're talking about, the girl who had to give the statement and give evidence. I mean, she talks about how ashamed she was of herself, and, how she had to give up work for months, and she had to go for counselling, and, it's all been brought back up by this again. But there's also, and we often forget this, there's the family of the perpetrator.
Yeah.
There's the family of
the offender,
Raymond Shorten.
Yeah.
And in a way, that podcast we made, Beast,
Yeah.
The murder of Nora Sheehan, that really delved into that, what happens to the families of both the perpetrators and the victims, and how can they ever come together and reach out to one another. And, in that case, we spoke to Juliana Moore Watkins, whose brother, Noel Long, was ultimately convicted of the cold case murder of Nora Sheehan. And she talks about the impact his crimes have had on her life, on her family. In this case, a daughter of Raymond Shorten sort of publicly posted, Nikita is her name, and she publicly posted the effect of her dad's actions. She talks about, she posted it on Father's Day to say essentially that she's grieving for a dad she believed she once had, but she now knows.
Yeah, I mean, what she said
was never what she believed he was.
Yeah, grieving for a dad that we once had before we ever knew what he was, and she talks about being proud of her family, having to endure, because obviously he wasn't named during the trial. Everybody who's charged with rape in Ireland has automatic anonymity up until the point at which they're convicted, and then they are named unless it would also identify the victim. Raymond Shorten was named in this case because obviously the victims are random. They're randomly in his taxi. The reason people aren't named after rape cases might be if there was a family connection or something like that. That didn't arise in this case. So she's obviously talking about the day after the day before, which is effectively he's named, I think it was Thursday. Then on Friday, they're hit with all of that social media because it was a huge reaction to the story. And she's saying she's so proud of her family for going through it. But she also, and we've seen many cases over the years where families rally around an offender, where they refuse to accept the facts. We've just after finishing doing a story in the North about, a victim being abused by the daughters of an offender. These people, Nikita in this case, taken a totally different line. They've really backed up the victims and not done any of this kind of, downplaying or anything like that. She says, I'm so happy for the girls who got the justice they deserved. This has nothing to do with us, and that man is nothing to us. I'm grateful for the amazing family I have and the most amazing woman who raised us. Peace.
And just on that point, I mean, she's clearly talking about her mother there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that woman...
Yeah.
If they were still together, we don't know much about the family, but I mean, if that was your husband, going out doing that to girls your own children's age, I mean, you'd be sick. It's horrendous. So he's in custody where he's awaiting sentencing after being convicted of those two separate rapes. And I think, this sentence is going to be one that there will be all eyes on, It's going to be interesting to see. He didn't plead guilty. There was a trial. No. He was found guilty, so we won't have that.
No. It's not a one-off case, or
no.
There's two victims at the least.
But we don't know anything yet about any previous convictions. That'll all come up at sentencing, but we will cover it. I just want to say, I suppose, that for the majority of the really good taxi drivers out there, this is we don't thankfully have too many of these cases coming up before the courts. We all know and are very grateful for taxi drivers to bring home younger people who are sometimes have had too much to drink, and often taxi drivers will, help kids out of the car, will call to the doors. There is a really good-natured, they are by and large very good-natured group of people, and every occupation, including very much our own, has the bad eggs and has those that are just, there's baddies everywhere, unfortunately.
There is, and they can be, predatory people are attracted to positions that give them opportunities. But of course, the vast majority, if I've had so many good experiences and heard so many taxi drivers who are like, knights riding to justice for people, getting people home, looking after them and all of that. It must sicken them.
Yeah.
He was a funny character, those guys, Raymond Shorten. I'm sure there was nothing to indicate. In fact, he was one of these guys who went on Facebook and used to rant about unlicensed taxis and lack of regulation and all of that, So
And I think probably, look, like everything else, this Raymond Shorten is only really coming on most of our radars, but I'm sure that there will be a lot more stuff about him now that will be untangled or maybe come to light now that he has been convicted.
Absolutely.
So we'll wait and see what the sentence is.
Well,
all right. Thanks, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.